Hari Om. I will repeat the question in English. Thanks to Anil uncle for helping to translate. The I arising out of the ego and the I that arises out of Chaitanya or consciousness. What is the difference between them? And how can we determine the difference between them? So if we start with the basic definition of what is ahankara, what is ego? So simply put, identifying ourselves with the body, mind, intellect equipment is ego or ahankara. It is not the traditional Hindi or definition of pride. And this is known as ego, egoity, or egoism in spiritual English vernacular. So Swamiji gives a very detailed description. Actually, the answer to this question can be found in Swamiji's book, Paramamrit Chintan, for whoever is interested in reading the whole. Right? But he says in his book, he describes the body and the gross body as Thul Deha. And then the mind, intellect, or he says Man, Buddhi, Chitta, and Ahankar. That is your Sukshma Deha. So for this particular question, we are focused on the mind and intellect, that apparatus. So if we look at the mind, we can say it is the faculty of, say, either desire or repulsion. Intellect is the faculty, that helps us determine the truth of things. Ego is the one that incorrectly identifies the body, mind, intellect to be the self. And then we have chitta, or we can say desire, which has a tendency to fixate on things. And this can actually work with us or against us, as we will see later. Now, the aspect that, of course, we are dealing with today is ego and identifying. Swamiji in his book, Paramamrit Chintan, says that identifying ourselves with the body, mind equipment is ahankara, and he calls it the personality self. Now, using the same body, mind equipment, if the mind is still, there are no thoughts, then the self-awareness or pure consciousness, absolute awareness will rises spontaneously, and that is essential self. So our journey is going from personality self to the essential self. Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi says that the mind is a wondrous power residing in the self, right? It causes all the thoughts to arise. There is no independent entity other than thoughts. Thoughts are absolutely the nature of the mind. And apart from thoughts, there is no independent entity called the world, because the mind is projecting the world. Just like a spider projects, emits the thread out and then resolves it in itself. The mind does the same. It projects the world and then withdraws it into itself. But the thing though is, when the mind projects the world, the self does not appear. And when the world withdraws, then the self automatically rises. So the self in here is the Atman, Brahman, absolute awareness, whatever, the higher nature is what we can say. Now, awareness is primordial. It is the original state, beginningless, endless, without attributes, unsupported, without parts, and without change. Consciousness, on the other hand, is contact, a reflection against the surface. We have this, like Swamiji was saying today, a good description, I guess, chapter 7 onwards, Jnana Vijnana Yoga, Vibhuti Yoga, Akshar Brahma. I mean, all these chapters in the Bhagavad Gita are dedicated to answering, this question. But the 2 shlokas I will read out that kind of resonate with me on, in trying to find an answer to this question, or from chapter 7, the 4th and 5th shlokas. So the 4th shloka goes, Bhumirapo nalo vayuhu khammano buddhirevacha ahankara iti yamme bhinna prakriti rashtadha. Now in here, Sri Krishna is trying to enumerate that the matter aspect, which is the gross body of 5 elements, and then the body, mind, intellect, equipment, as the eightfold nature, is Bhagavan's lower nature. Now by Bhagavan, it is our lower nature too, right? So this is somehow, this has come to be superimposed upon, the truth or the absolute through ignorance, through Maya. Now, the sense organs are the channels through which, we observe all the stimuli from the outside world, and they reach this inner focus point in our system called the mind. The mind then takes this and rationally classifies it, it systematizes it with the help of the intellect. Now, at all these three levels, either of sense perception or mental reception or intellectual assimilation, the ego I pervades. The next shloka says, Apareyamita swanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabahu yayedam dharyate jagata. Now, the next shloka, Bhagavan says that we are all enveloped in him. So there is a higher nature, which is the very life element or the life principle by which this entire world is supported or upheld. Now, after he talks about the eightfold lower nature, he says that that is not all. The self possesses, besides these equipments, a higher nature. Now, that higher nature is your pure consciousness or awareness. Nisargadatta Maharaj actually has a beautiful quote on this. He says that as the universe is the body of the mind, it took me, few minutes to actually gauge the depth of this quote, so I will repeat it. As the universe is the body of the mind, so is consciousness the body of the Supreme. So the above talk, of course, we are, talking about the BMI equipment to understand the different layers, difference between personality self, essential self, all that is fine, but this is all theory, right? And we have been trained by Swamiji to not be content with theory anymore, right? So how do we go from just saying, okay, ABCD is the difference between, personality self and essential self? How do we actually go from personality self to essential self? And I just wanted to, say, I guess get the inputs from different saints, contemporary saints. So Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi says there are two ways that it can be done. One is simple self-inquiry, who am I? And the other is to submit. Submit is surrender to the Supreme Self, or absolute surrender to the Supreme Self. Now, for those who follow the path of self-inquiry, they're looking inwards. And for those who strive through love, they submit to the Guru who is manifested outwardly. Now he says constant contemplation, who am I? Wherever you are, whichever thought you have, with due diligence, the only question to ask is, who am I? Who is this thought rising to? I have found that when we walk through crowds, whether it be, in big cities, New York City, when you walk out of the train station and you're trying to get to wherever you are walking through huge crowds. But we are always trying to find the gaps between these crowds, right? We don't hit people one-on-one to get to our destination. It's the same with thoughts. Don't focus on the thoughts, just find a way around them. Ignore them, right? So that is one way of looking at it. But Ramana Maharishi's method of self-inquiry is just asking, who am I? And then the answer will emerge as to who am I? And then the mind just dissolves into pure consciousness. The same concept has been expounded by Nisargadatta Maharaj as well. Once we begin being the dispassionate observer, we realize that we are the creator and we are trying to fit ourselves to be the finite when we know we are the infinite. Imagine, trying to fit ourselves in shoe size, half size smaller than regular, and trying to walk around in those shoes the entire day. That's exactly what we are doing today, right? Trying to fit ourselves to be finite when we are the infinite. Shankaracharya and Vivek Chudamani says, use the process of elimination. At every thought that comes, say, not this, not now. And we could use that kind of discrimination to quieten the mind. Now, all these are, like Swamiji says, Chitta Shuddhi, right? To quieten the mind, to prepare for meditation, to transcend to the next state. Luckily for us, we have a guru who has been teaching us these techniques, for however long I can remember. And he says, be with the self, be in the consciousness of self, and constant sadhana. In the book Paramamrit Chintan again, he says in our day-to-day living, a few tips to follow. He says, do not dwell on the past, present memories, right? Like Krishnamurti says, live from moment to moment. Intentional. Do not engage in conversations that are, unrelated topics. You should not imagine things. Take things at face value for what they are. Stay away from unpleasant situations. Do not engage in unpleasant situations. Not to be highly opinionated, and not to be extremely overtly reactive to situations. And most importantly of all, follow the path shown by saints of yore and even contemporary saints, and of course our own Swamiji. Now, those were the things not to do. What are the things to do? We all know, we know that as well. Namasmaran, Swadhyay, constant contemplation, being intentional with our sadhana, and following the path shown by Swamiji. So of course, we know this is not easy. They've been doing it for years. Some are way ahead than the others. It's a journey going from point A to point B. But the one thing to remember though is to ignore any thoughts that arise, refuse all thoughts except the one that I am. Nisargadatta Maharaj says that the only thought we need to remember is I am, not I am this or I am that. None of that. It's just I am. Now, one of my kids in 5th grade Bal Vihar at Chinmay Mission, had a question. So the question was, it is believed that God is in all of us. So that makes each and every one of us an avatar, right? So how come there are only 10 avatars? So the question, it was kind of, it just hit me the time when they asked. But if you sit back and think about it, right? Well, our divinity, we would all be divine if our personality self was merged with the essentials of. Our divinity is diluted by the personality self. So once we go from here to there, we could consider such a person an Avatari Purush, right? Not yet. So this discussion was definitely, I thought, beyond my intellectual acumen. But I bow to Swamiji in reverence for patiently guiding and gently nudging me in the right direction. Hari Om.